I'm sure everyone was shocked. Blown away, in fact, when the Toronto Blue Jays did not sign Juan Soto to a extension, to a contract that was 15 years, $765 million. $51 million a season. I love the tweets that are like, Shesterkin signed for this. Hockey players, yeah. He got more. He got more than hockey players. For sure he did. Juan Soto, it's over. There's no more Ennis putting on the clown makeup. It is purely done. The Jays strike out yet again after star chasing, which there's some positives. There's, I think, some drawbacks to this. A lot of people pretty concerned, I think anyways, that the Blue Jays were not focused on other things, that they went and they chased Juan Soto and they were all in and they couldn't even talk to another free agent and maybe they were going to miss out on names. And I'll address that with Ben Nicholson-Smith in a few minutes because he's there. He's at the winter meetings. Guy's as plugged in as anybody on the Toronto Blue Jays. And so I'll ask him whether or not he thinks that there's been any real damage done to the Blue Jays free agency for doing this. I'm a little skeptical given the names that are off the board already. But I will say this. It's a front office that has been presented as reeking of desperation by some insiders. A front office that's been trying to be pretty quiet about what they're doing and the way that they're moving this offseason. But either way, when the reports are, hey, they're in on everybody. Hey, they're looking at everything. Hey, these guys are trying to manage for their jobs. Ross Atkins trying to get a free agent to save his job. You're starting to look at the landscape, and it's not overly encouraging. So the remaining couple of players, while they could be nice for the Toronto Blue Jays, you're still going to have to drastically overpay for, and you're going to have to outbid and outcompel these guys to sign here over in those markets, which again, would say have the edge over Toronto, especially at this given point where the Jays are staring down the barrel of a group that seems to be on the precipice of change. So I want to start with this because I don't think that going after Juan Soto is bad. I think it's overall, in a vacuum, a great sign that this front office is able to convince ownership to spend or to get in and try to spend this kind of money on free agents. That's an awesome thing. You want to have that in your arsenal. You don't want to be a team that can only win one way, which is like the way that a team, let's say the Pirates does it or the Oakland Athletics do it, where there's one path, which is collect a bunch of talent when they're young and win while they are paid nothing, and perhaps selectively pay one or two guys while watching everyone else walk away. The Blue Jays have established themselves over this past run to be a group that will be willing to go into free agency, right? When people say no one will sign here, well, that's not true. People have signed here. The Jays have been able to acquire players. I saw a tweet from a friend of the show, Keegan Matheson, where he's like, hey, it's an outdated narrative about Toronto and that no one will come here. I think that that's honestly just like a little bit of a straw man. It's not that no one will sign in Toronto. It's just that it's a little bit more dependent on how the team is doing than some other teams. And it isn't as attractive as some of the glamour markets in baseball. It is in a different country. There are some differences for these guys. And so you do need to compensate for that. But yes, of course, Toronto's a great city, especially if you're rich. There's no doubt about these things. And that's why they've been able to acquire some of these guys. But here's the lesson from the weekend. Here's the lesson from yesterday. Here's the lesson from last year. This team is not just going to be the Mets. They've got to do basically a hybrid model, which is something that they were trying to do when the team was at its peak, when it came to excitement. Remember a few years ago when we were talking about, boy, is this the best that the Blue Jays have ever looked, where the farm system is extremely deep and there are resources. And at that time, we were talking about when to sign Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and when to sign Bo Bichette. And so I tweeted something to this effect yesterday at JD Bunkis. You can follow me there. You can reach out to the show anytime. That the Jays can't simply do this. They've got to go back to kind of what I thought I thought this front office was supposed to do in the first place. They've got to draft and develop. They've got to sign international free agents. They've got to be very clever with their money. They've got to identify talent in other organizations that they feel is either blocked in the like Teoscar Hernandez mold or who are being underappreciated and undervalued by their organization, which again is very, very hard to do in today's day and age. And then use free agency as a weapon to put you over the top, not to try to go out and solve all your problems by spending $700+ million on Juan Soto or on Shohei Ohtani and try to paper over all the other issues with your organization. And frankly, that's kind of why none of this was as fun as it should have been. Because one, people were scarred by the Ohtani situation and this was dragging out. And I think most people could kind of put together that this wasn't the exact same as going after a Shohei Ohtani. There were different reasons for it. We also understood that the Mets were sitting there and we'd been through this before. So there was a level of scar tissue that had come with this situation. But there was also the underlying feeling of you're not a piece away. You're not a Juan Soto away. You need a bullpen. You need a starting pitcher. You need more than one bat. You need a farm system. There's just so much other work to be done than Juan Soto that even fans trying to dream on him, I don't think we're as excited as most other fan bases are. And so that's just it for the Blue Jays. You can't just be shooting for long shots and shooting for the moon and trying to sell people on a star. You've got to sign your players when they're eligible for extensions and you have some leverage. You've got to draft. You got to develop. You have to have a farm system. That is the only way Toronto is going to be competitive and have long competitive windows. This just is not the way. Anyways, Ben Nicholson-Smith of At the Letters. He's down at the winter meetings. I just made him sit on the line. Hey, Benny, how we doing, buddy?
Hey, JD, doing well. You're making some good points right there, I got to say.
Well, I don't think that it's anything novel. I don't think that it's anything that isn't kind of obvious, to be honest, which to me is part of what is so frustrating with this. Like, I don't believe that Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins, if given the truth serum, think that this is the way to build a baseball team either. I think that they're in a position where they basically only have one option, which is to go out there, sign somebody splashy, and just desperately hope that things kind of go their way.
Well, that was the Soto hope. And I agree with you. Like, I actually think going after Juan Soto is a great idea. And just like going after Shohei Ohtani is a great idea. And that's kind of the most obvious thing to say.
Sure.
These guys are like historic players. They're incredible. So, yeah, if you have any chance to sign them, you take that chance. But I think, the Ohtani thing, clearly there was some traction. Clearly there was some mutual interest. And I've had no one tell me that actually existed with Soto, which is kind of why I was a little tepid on the whole thing this entire time. And it's just that the people I was talking to were never really describing the Blue Jays as front runners or favorites or, even motivated to go above and beyond Steve Cohen. Like, it always just seemed like the Mets were going to be that team. So to your point, this then puts the spotlight on the Blue Jays' ability to do other things well. And ideally that would have been draft and develop. And that would have been have this farm system like the Rays or the Guardians or some of these teams that do it on a small budget, or barring that, and I think this is why some fans right now feel very uneasy, but barring that, it is on Ross Atkins now, not to sign one player who's a superstar, but it's on Ross Atkins to go out and thread that needle, find 3, 4, 5 really good players, hit on all of them. And given the way last year unfolded, I think fans understandably have question marks about whether that can happen.
Well, especially since this year, there is going to be heavy competition from some of the deepest pocketed organizations in baseball, right? Like, it's not just the Jays who are interested in Max Fried. It's the Red Sox and it's the Yankees who are interested in him as well. It's not just the Jays who are interested in Teoscar and Santander. It's like the Dodgers are in the mix there. They're not out on Teoscar because they signed Conforto, according to many insiders. The Santander is drawing interest from also the Yankees, from also the Red Sox. Like, I think that they're in a pretty tough position. But before we move to the other free agents, because I really do think most people were prepared for this. Like, hey, let the Soto signing happen. Not because they wanted to tear the Band-Aid off of the hope, but they wanted the real free agency period to begin for this team, which is now the case, right? Like, now we're in it. Now we're in the time where we get to see what they're actually made of and what they're going to be able to pull off. But before we do that, I don't know even people want to hear this because at this point it's become kind of a running joke in the market of, hey, Toronto, always the bridesmaid, right? Always the runner-up. Oh, Toronto actually offered the most money but didn't sign the player. But then these reports started to trickle in about like, hey, what the Yankees were offering and then what the Red Sox final offer was. Do we know what Toronto's final offer was? Because there was at least some kind of insinuation at a couple of points in this that Toronto might be the team that comes over the top and offers the most money. And then I didn't see anything that was what their final bid was conclusively.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I'm trying to pin that down, and I've been asking around about this to try to get a sense of it because I do think it's a really important variable. Of course, right? And even if you miss the question of how aggressive you are, I mean, it's interesting. And look, I do think broadly it's a good thing that the Blue Jays can go after these guys. And Shai made this point yesterday, but you dial the clock back 15, 20 years, like there is no way that JP Ricciardi was ever going to have the chance to go after these top free agents. Even Alex Anthopoulos, his big free agent contract, the biggest free agent contract Alex Anthopoulos ever signed with the Blue Jays was $82 million for Russ Martin. And it worked out great. And, Alex Anthopoulos is an awesome GM. But my point is they didn't have those resources. So I've had a couple people suggest that it was likely over $700 million. I mean, that's hardly headline news at this point. And the question for me in this, and the reason I haven't, reported this in any sort of concrete way, is I just don't know how much of that was going to be deferred. I don't know what that final number was. And I haven't seen anyone report what that final number was. So, I don't think that's out there. But the question of deferrals is big because the one thing with the Mets offer, and this is where this offer is just epic and an absolute grand slam for Scott Boras to get this deal done. But there are no deferrals here. There's an opt-out here. The present value of this deal is unbelievable. And I know people focus on the Blue Jays, and rightfully so. But, man, if you look at this from the standpoint of, like, the history of Major League Baseball contracts, this deal is just massive and a huge coup for Scott Boras.
Yeah, I got to tell you, though, I think that the reason why I need to see the number in this case more than others is to see potentially whether or not this was a bit of a fool's errand. Because you're right about those things where it's like, hey, it's a good thing to have these resources. Duh. Like any fan should understand that, right? Like I've seen people go, oh, so it's fine. To have that is a good thing. There's just no doubt about it. It's a great thing to have a bunch of money that can be behind you. But all along, Occam's razor approach to this was, hey, Steve Cohen is going to come over the top and pay the most money. And the only way that the Blue Jays could have competed with these other teams that are further down the competitive track, that are more familiar with him in terms of a market with New York and offering him some familiarity, was that they were going to offer the most money. And so if they got that really wrong, right? Like if they were trying to do deferred money and they were trying to offer not as much as some of these other teams were, it kind of speaks to a disconnect here. And maybe even you could go so far as to say, like, that actually is you being used for leverage. Like that is your name being thrown into the mix to these other teams as a bit of a false flag that you were never actually really in it at all.
Yeah. And I think, look, I haven't crossed that possibility off, right?
Yeah.
Like in my, and I hate to go back to the Ohtani thing, but in my mind, the Ohtani thing wasn't leverage for CAA. He's Shohei Ohtani. He didn't need the leverage. He wasn't even necessarily concerned about the money in the same way that some players are.
Yeah.
He traveled to Dunedin, Florida. Ohtani was interested in the Jays, like seriously interested. But with Soto, like, I have heard no information to cross off the possibility that the Blue Jays were purely there for leverage. Doesn't mean that's the case. Doesn't mean that Juan Soto in his heart didn't truly consider the Blue Jays. It's just I haven't heard that. We haven't heard from Soto yet. We don't know how his mindset was throughout this process. But I think it's possible that the Blue Jays, Red Sox, and Dodgers were all being used for leverage.
Yeah, I just never really saw. There was a compelling case, which is the Blue Jays might come over the top and offer the most amount of money, right? But it was always really difficult to think like Steve Cohen was going to sit there. Like I've seen financial breakdowns of how rich this guy is and what the Juan Soto money still means to him. And it's chump change. Like $51 million to this guy is chump change. So the idea that the Blue Jays were going to blow them under the water in a way where Steve Cohen went, I just can't do it. Especially given that this to me for the Mets represents more than just getting the great player. It's the shift in the paradigm of who the big bad team in New York is, which I really don't think is going to be grabbed as much maybe in this market, but should be around baseball, right? The idea that, hey, what a stick it to the Yankees this was. To go out and steal their star, a guy that their fans loved, really, really loved, and just say, yeah, we're going to outbid you and we're going to make you look like a poverty franchise for offering someone $760 million. That's something. That's not a nothing. But then the other cases for Soto was like, well, he could play for a whole country. I was like, we're doing this? We're putting this out there? Like, that's a real report from some people? Come on, give me a break. We know that's not a thing. Yeah, sure, it's exciting when guys get here and they get to travel the country and they get to see it. That's not going to be in Juan Soto's priorities, is being there. It's like he wants to win baseball games and make the most amount of money. And the Jays, out of all those teams, represented the biggest long shot for all of that. And now you get into kind of the stability stuff. And you want to talk about, you mentioned, hey, shining a light on the issues that the Jays have as they leave this process without Juan Soto. Yeah, the biggest one is that they're pending free agents, Bo Bichette and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. There's just no way that any reasonable person could think that they didn't look at this and go, wow, that's a lot of money. Yeah, we're not going to get as much as him, but why wouldn't we want to walk to free agency and experience the exact same thing where we're being courted by a bunch of different organizations, hear their pitches, get to see their farm systems, and then hope some billionaire owner comes way over the top on an offer for us? Yeah, exactly. And I think Vlad Jr. actually is one of the better comps to Soto who's out there. And Soto, he is a better hitter. Like, you look at the OPS plus, you look at the on-base percentage, just the way, he's a better hitter. He's a more accomplished hitter. He's more skilled. And so Soto has set the bar so high. I mean, he set it incredibly high. Vlad Jr. is not going to clear that bar by any measure. But we spent a lot of this year wondering about an extension in the $300 million for Vlad Jr. And Soto is now pushing $8. And Vlad Jr., he's 25, Soto's 26. Vlad Jr. will have free agency at 26 years old. So you could talk about the same kind of term. Is it a 15-year deal? Is it a 12-year deal? I mean, even if Vlad Jr. is not at $51 million, which, clearly that's precedent-setting, that's probably not going to be surpassed for a few years. I mean, that's the kind of deal that this is. I don't think that anyone's going to come along next year and just, go to 52, and it won't be Vlad Jr., but could he be 40? Is it 13 times 40? Because that's over $500 million. And I've heard people here at the winter meetings speculate, hey, what does this mean for Vlad Jr.? Could he be over $500 million? And I'm not inside Vlad Jr.'s head, but I guarantee he's seen the deal for Juan Soto, and I doubt it made him very sad. I doubt that he was too upset to see that deal come across. 100%, man. And if you're those guys too, what you really learned in this free agency process as well is Juan Soto's age mattered an incredible amount when looking at this deal and looking at the money and saying, okay, well, he's this. And if you're Vladdy, and it shouldn't be, and I want to include Bo in this because what's Bo now? He's 27, so he'll be 28 in free agency. So Bo Bichette being 28 years old and Vladdy being even younger, that those two guys could enter free agency is going to cause teams to go even higher on their numbers. And so, yeah, I can't imagine what the Jays would have to sit down and offer Vladimir Guerrero Jr. at this point to actually get a deal done because, yeah, like you just said, the idea that he could get $500 million seems so crazy given where we've been with this contract for the last couple of years. But after seeing what Soto got and the level of desperation that some of these teams had, like if you're the New York Yankees and you want to establish some level of credibility, don't you want to get into that ballpark for Vladdy next offseason with Aaron Judge? Like, aren't you willing to at least consider that, seeing as you were willing to go $750 for Juan Soto? I can't say that that's a 0%. Like, he puts together another awesome year, like the one he just had. And you're telling me the Yankees wouldn't do that? Like, I don't know. I don't believe that would be the case. I can't imagine that they would simply just completely close the door to an idea like that. So, yeah, I think that this is about as potentially ugly as things could possibly have gone for this team. And it's crazy to think back from a couple of years ago what it felt like Toronto was building to where they're at now. Okay, so it's pivot time. Tyler O'Neill signs with Baltimore. Gary Sanchez signs with Baltimore. Willie Adames goes to San Francisco. Mets sign Clay Holmes. Danny Jansen goes to the Rays. Blake Trinan, 222 to the Dodgers. A couple of those names I think were like loosely linked to the Jays. But do you feel like during this process, because this to me is like a very, very, very important question with all the Soto stuff, that they missed out on anybody that they would have wanted?
I think they would. So, trying to think how to answer this, because they would like a lot of those players. Like, who wouldn't want Willie Adames? But I don't think that they missed an opportunity there, because the Jays, I never saw them going to 185, 190 for Willie Adames. I think that if they could have gotten Willie Adames for maybe more like 150 over 6, then maybe that's a discussion that they would have had. But they're more focused on outfielders to begin with. Tyler O'Neill, that's a good player, but I don't think that he's like such a transformative player that you have to put everything on hold for him. Clay Holmes is a good pitcher. To answer your question, I don't think that they've cut themselves off. I think that going after Soto, it probably did, for instance, with O'Neill, it probably pushed them out of that market. But I think that's a price that you can live with. I think that's fine. There's still so many guys out there, and I actually still think the Jays are going to be patient. Like, we'll see what happens here, right? The Corbin Burns, Max Fried, I think that's the most logical place for the Blue Jays to go now. But the price of starting pitching is super high. Like, it's higher than anyone expected. And the Jays are trying to thread this needle now where they're trying to add hitting and starting pitching and bullpen help potentially for, $38, $39, $40 million, something in that range. Like, that's going to be really tough, because Fried alone might cost 25. Corbin Burns might cost 30. Like, you're talking about really, really expensive deals. And granted, in those cases, they could push past the luxury tax. They could push, closer to 250, 260 if they land one of those guys. But the competition is also going to be really intense there. And this is the Soto thing. So he leaves the American League East, which in one sense is good, but it also leaves motivated teams with a lot of money and the Yankees and Red Sox were competing for the same players as the Blue Jays.
Yeah, and who are trying to satiate fan bases who are pissed off, right? Who are super annoyed that they either lost Juan Soto or didn't get Juan Soto. So, yeah, I got to say, too, on that, this is actually a real point of frustration for me. And I get that a lot of people get the projections wrong. Like, you read articles, and most people tried to peg, I think the highest projected that I saw for, like, Max Fried was like $20 million, right? So let's say he gets 25. To me, that's just like such a bad look for the front offices in general, where they go, oh, it's so much more than we expected, and it took us out of the running. It's like, yeah, it's free agency. Expect that it's going to be higher than what your original projection is. And so for the Blue Jays, like when they had the Brandon Nimmo thing, right, where they're like, oh, well, he signed for way more than we thought he was going to get. You go, yeah, okay, well, he was one of the premier outfielders in free agency, and you were going to be competing against the New York Mets. So maybe go higher. Maybe think that it's going to be higher. Like, how often do we hear the premier free agents where they go, he went for so much less than we expected? Like, I'm so done with that idea for the Blue Jays, like that they can look at it and go, well, everyone was confused. It's like, no. It's free agency. It's going to cost you a lot. You're going to have to spend a ton more than you ever hoped to. Okay, so is there a first domino in all of this for you?
I mean, I just think it was Soto, and I think now we're going to see a lot of deals.
Yeah.
So, on the outfield market, Teoscar Hernandez could go back to the Dodgers soon. And then you could have Anthony Santander's market start to move pretty quick. The trade market. I mean, there are a lot of guys out there in the trade market, right? Nolan Arenado is out there and seemingly ready to move on from St. Louis. Someone said that he'd like to play with the Dodgers. Doesn't seem like that's going to happen, but there are other teams out there in the third base market that could take a look there, including the Blue Jays could take a look. But Arenado controls his future with a no-trade clause, so, we'll see what that means. But there are a lot of players, out there. Alec Boehm is out there. Nick Castellanos is out there in trade. I expect the Blue Jays to survey the market on all of this. But I think the position player market, and it's not just me, but I've heard from people here in Dallas who expect that the position player market will start to move pretty quick now that Soto's gone.
Yeah, okay, but so that's more what I mean is, do you think that the Jays now have pivoted to a clear target?
No, my read on the Jays is that Fried and Burns are probably the next names to watch, and I think that to the extent that the Jays could, surprise us and make a splash. I do think those are the names to watch. Bregman, Santander, you want to keep an eye on those guys too. But I think that the way money's flying around and the way the Jays have talked about being patient, I'm not going to be surprised at all if the Blue Jays leave here without having made a major move.
Yeah. I don't think anybody should be surprised at this point, but that's so deflating. That actually...
I wish I had better news.
I know, but that even just the way you said it just almost threw me off the interview for a second here, because I was like, oh, God, don't let that be the case. Because then that begs this question, which is, all right, what does the secondary market for this team look like then?
Well, and that's where trades might come in. And this is where, of course, if you really go down the list, you get to your Max Keplers of the world and your Nick Pavettas and your Sean Manayas. And look, some of those guys are probably going to have good seasons next year. It's not always the big names. And I had someone here say, you know what, watch out for Anthony Santander. He hit 40 homers this past season, and good for him.
Well,
but
yeah.
This person said it's not happening again. So, look, that's one opinion. We'll see what happens there. But this is where the spotlight and the pressure returns to Ross Atkins, because he has to piece it together. And it is going to have to be not one player who has an amazing season, but he's going to have to hit on a few players who do really good things for the Jays in 2025. And that's not an easy thing to do. He's done it before, but he's also whiffed before. So this is a tough ask. And it's a market that's very competitive. It's a healthy industry right now, much healthier than it was a year or two ago. Some of that TV uncertainty has resolved. Some of the COVID, revenue flow issues have been resolved for various teams, and teams are spending. So it's a really competitive market, and you've got to be prepared to spend if you want those top names.
Yeah. It's certainly feeling right now very Justin Turner IKF-y.
Yeah. I mean, that is a possibility for the Blue Jays, right? I think that they will look at Fried, look at Burns. They will put offers forward, I expect, for those guys. But are they going to outbid the Yankees for Max Fried? Are they going to outbid the Red Sox and the Giants for Corbin Burns? I don't know. I mean, it would be, to do that, they would have to sign the biggest deal in franchise history, right? Because right now that's George Springer. That's the biggest deal they've signed. And I agree with you. They can sign free agents, and they will sign big free agents again. There's no doubt in my mind. But is it going to be Corbin Burns this winter? Is it going to be Max Fried? I don't know. So that could lead to a situation where the offseason is more like Sean Manaea, Max Kepler, and a couple relievers. And that, I don't know. I mean, maybe that team will win 89 games and make the playoffs. I don't know. But I'm intrigued to find out. I'm curious to see where it all goes. But it is a tough position that they're in. This is not a layup of an offseason.
No, it never was, though. And so it's I think that when you were offered the types of resources that these guys have been, and this is part of it that I don't think is lost in the discussion, but isn't mentioned enough, is that it's you're graded on a harsher curve here, right? You should be graded more critically when you've had all these things at your disposal. Like you mentioned the Alex Anthopoulos thing. It's okay, an $80 million free agent was the biggest ticket that he could end up going out and sign. And yeah, there were a lot of lean years with him. And I think that the rewrite on his story has been a little overly glamorous from a lot of Jays fans who were pretty frustrated with him before 2015. Sure. But yeah, he won some trades, did make it to ALCS couple. And so far with this team, to have the system that they had, to have the depth in the cupboards, to have some of the players that they inherited, and then to also have the money at your disposal, to have it turn into this is just it's cataclysmic. And that's why sure, could they get lucky? Could they hit on some of these free agents? Yeah. Should they get chance to a certain degree to be evaluated based on what happens this year? But it's the misread on the Vladdy and Bo contracts and just where they're at with them, the state of the farm system as it is today, the fact that they're in a position where they have to be competing with all these teams for these free agents, like it's just so telling that it's beyond time to move off of this front office and that they'd already failed at their jobs. Like that the test was already over and that they were trying to put pen to paper. It's like, no. Like pens down, man. Pens down. You already blew it. Anyways, so it sounds like what you're saying is that they are prioritizing starting pitching over the top end bats in free agency when it comes to if they were to make a splash. We're trying to drill down sort of what the secondary move is. But you also mentioned trades. And a couple of those names in there I don't think are like too interesting to people. I think like Nolan Arenado specifically is a little strange if you weren't willing to sign Chapman a season ago, and then you're going to go out and trade to get Arenado, and you're like, all right. I think my thing there is, so do you think that they're going to go deep into what is already a pretty shallow prospect pool, or that any trade that they were to try to consummate would be something that is like the Arenado deal, where you're taking on a lot of like pretty risky money, that there isn't really a trade out there where you'd be going like, oh, wow, I can't believe that they, like, let's put it this way. There's not going to be a Dalton Varsho trade.
Right. Yeah. I think the thing with the Jays is, and this can be a good thing, I think like philosophically it's good to be open-minded, but they're like so open-minded and they're so in on everything that, sometimes it's a little bit hard to see where their priority list starts. And look, I mean, this can work at times. Like, I'm not saying otherwise, but I do think that they're just in on everything. They're checking on the veteran bats who, have money attached to them. They're checking on the price of cheap pitching. Like someone told me that their own guys, they've let it be known that, your Will Wagners, your Spencer Horwitz's, those guys are available in trade, and they've let other teams know that they would trade those guys for the right impact addition. So, they're talking to the top free agents. They're talking to the mid-tier free agents. They're talking to pitchers. They're talking to hitters. They're doing everything. So it's all on the table. I could certainly imagine another Dalton Varsho type trade. But anything's on the table for these guys, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but at the end of the day, it's results. And this connects back to the Soto, right? It's like, you're interviewing for a job and you're a finalist, but you don't get it. So end of the day, you don't have the job. End of the day, you didn't advance things. And that's just kind of where they are. Their roster, as we speak right now, it's worse than where they ended the season last year. So the season doesn't start tomorrow. They have time. These things change. They will add players. They will add pitching, but it has to happen. They have a lot of work to do to get to that point.
Okay, so this is the last one then for me. If I was Atkins, like if I was in his shoes at this point and the market's starting to dry up and it becomes clear that you do get outbid for a couple of the names that we're mentioning, and then your pivot is basically, hey, we can remove more pieces from, again, an already depleted farm system, one that doesn't compare to anyone else in our division, to try and go out and acquire some very likely bad money. We can sign some lower tier free agents to, again, contracts that are too high for what these players are going to provide you. And we're staring down the barrel of losing Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Bo Bichette to free agency. Obviously, priority number one to me would be like, hey, we need to do the Godfather offer to Vladdy right now. Like, sign Vladdy and Bo. That would actually give you some measure of confidence, I think, in the front office, but also just the direction of the team, knowing that you actually have those two guys under contract. So that's the ideal situation number one. But as we've already kind of outlined, it really does seem implausible that that's going to be the case, that they're going to be able to settle in on a number with both of those guys that would get them to walk away from free agency. And I had a conversation with Jim Bowden last week where he basically said that he doesn't even see that there's a number right now for the Jays to get that done with Vladdy. And you'd have to think, too, like, just looking out competitively, that Vladdy's got a brain. He's able to see what they've done here and accomplished here, and maybe he's thinking about that as well. That if you were being rational, you would go, hey, we missed. It's definitely my fault, but I got to give you my honest and professional assessment, and that is that we should not be throwing more good money after bad. And in fact, we should actually be pivoting out of this idea that we have to be competitive next year. Like, look at the landscape, look where we are in the division, look where we finished last season, look at the assets that we have, look at the contracts that we've got. The responsible thing to do here is to actually take a step back before we can take a step forward. Do you think that there is any possibility that that could happen this offseason?
I essentially don't think so. I mean, I would say like a 1% chance. And someone asked me last night, like, hey, would the Jays, any chance they would trade Vlad Jr.? And I said the same thing. Like, I think it's like a minuscule chance. I don't think it's going to happen. I think that the Blue Jays, from the very, very, very top of the organization on down, have decided that, hey, they want to try to compete next year. They want to try to, get into one of those 6 playoff spots that exist in a league of 15 teams. And can you be top 6 in a 15-team league? They think that they can do that. And it's not that high of a bar, which is kind of what makes last season like so perplexing, is like how in a league where like almost half the teams make it, you didn't even compete. Like it wasn't even close. But anyway, we've talked about last year enough. For 2025, my sense is from the entire organization has resolved to, and they've communicated this internally, they've communicated this to other players and agents. They have made the decision, and this ship is, this ship is out sailing along out there, and they're trying to win.
Benny, I hope the next time I talk to you, it's not as bleak. I really hope that.
I hope so too, man. That'd be awesome. Let's hope that happens.
Yeah, the next conversation ideally is like, wow, they made some really smart, savvy moves, and they were actually able to pin down one of these free agents, and there's a growing sense of optimism about the direction of this organization. Forgive me if I'm not looking at that as, again, the most realistic outcome. Thanks for doing this, buddy, and enjoy the rest of the winter meetings.
Yeah, anytime. Hey, the Hail Mary for the Blue Jays would be like they win the draft lottery, they somehow get the 1-1 pick next year.
Sure.
And then, Max Fried wakes up and he decides he loves the city of Toronto. And who knows? Who knows? Maybe that'll happen. But glad to talk some baseball with you, JD, and we'll talk soon.
Yep, see you, buddy. Ben Nicholson-Smith at the Letters and MLB reporter for Sportsnet.